London, 1952, 7 years after the end of the Second World War. The city still wore its scars. Bomb sites from the Blitz remained as gaps in the skyline, like missing teeth in an old man's smile. But London was recovering. It was a city of industry, of resilience, and above all, a city of coal. Coal was the heartbeat of the British Empire. It powered the factories that lined the Thames. It fueled the trains that cut through the suburbs, and most intimately, it burned in the hearth of every home. In December, the domestic fires were not just a luxury, they were a necessity against the biting cold. To a Londoner, smoke was not pollution, it was the smell of progress. It was the smell of home. But nature was about to turn this comfort into a weapon. It began on December 5th. A high-pressure system, an anticyclone, settled over the city. The air became still, terribly, unnaturally still. Under normal circumstances, smoke rises, dispersing into the upper atmosphere. But on this day, a phenomenon known as temperature inversion occurred. A lid of warm air slid over the cold air near the ground. Trapping it, London was sealed inside a meteorological box. And inside that box, millions of chimneys continued to pump out sulfurous smoke. The smoke hit the ceiling of warm air, cooled, and fell back down. It mixed with the fog rising from the river. It turned yellow, then brown, then black. The pea super had arrived. By Saturday, the visibility had dropped to zero. This was not a mist, it was a wall. People couldn't see their own feet as they walked. Drivers abandoned their cars in the middle of the road because they couldn't see the curb. The buses stopped running. The ambulances stopped coming. The city, usually a cacophony of noise, fell into a muffled, eerie silence. The fog was tangible. It had a texture, greasy and gritty. It tasted of metal and rotten eggs. It stuck to clothes, turning white shirts gray within minutes. It seeped indoors, slithering through keyholes and down chimneys. Even inside cinemas, the fog became so thick that people in the back rows couldn't see the screen. Londoners, famous for their stiff upper lip, tried to carry on. They joked about the weather. They didn't know they were walking through a gas chamber. The horror of the Great Smog was not dramatic like a bombing raid. There were no explosions, no sirens. It was a silent, slow strangulation. The smog contained high concentrations of sulfur dioxide, which reacted with the water in the fog to create sulfuric acid. The people of London were breathing in acid. It started with a cough, then a wheeze, then the desperate struggle for oxygen. The elderly and the sick were the first to fall. In hospitals, the wards filled with patients gasping for air, their faces turning blue, cyanosis. But the doctors were helpless. The oxygen tanks ran empty, and outside, the fog was so thick that fresh supplies couldn't be delivered. At the Smithfield Show, an annual livestock exhibition, the prize cattle began to collapse. Their massive lungs couldn't filter the poison. Farmers, desperate to save their animals, soaked sacks in whiskey and wrapped them around the cows' heads, trying to create makeshift gas masks. Even the animals were not spared. Birds fell from the sky, crashing into sidewalks, dead before they hit the ground. It was a biological warning, loud and clear, but the city was too blind to see it. The smog didn't discriminate. It entered the palaces of the rich and the tenements of the poor. It wrapped its gray fingers around everyone. By the third and fourth day, the city's rhythm had changed into a funeral march, but there were no processions. The hearses couldn't drive. Bodies remained in homes for days, lying in cold rooms while the fog pressed against the windows. Undertakers ran out of coffins. There were reports of victims being buried in cardboard boxes. The florists sold out of wreaths. The most chilling statistic was not realized until weeks later. During those 5 days, the death rate in London eclipsed that of the worst weeks of the cholera epidemic of 1866. It was a massacre, hidden in plain sight. On December 9th, a fresh wind blew from the west. It swept down the Thames, piercing the inversion layer. Slowly, the lid was lifted. The killer fog began to disperse, drifting out into the North Sea. Londoners emerged from their homes, blinking in the pale winter sunlight, rubbing the soot from their eyes. They looked at their city, covered in a layer of black grime. Statues, buildings, cars, everything was coated in the residue of the smog. But the true cost was counted in lives. not dirt. Initial reports said 4.000 had died. Modern research suggests the number was closer to 12.000. 12.000 souls, claimed not by a virus, nor a war, but by the air they breathe. The Great Smog of 1952 changed the world. It shattered the romantic image of the London fog forever. It forced a government, initially reluctant to interfere with industry and home life, to act. It paved the way for the Clean Air Act of 1956, a landmark legislation that banned black smoke and ushered in the era of smokeless zones. It was a lesson learned in the hardest way possible, that the environment is not infinite, and the air is not free. Today, London still gets foggy, but it is a white, clean mist. Yet, if you look closely at the old stone buildings of the city, you can still see the dark stains in the crevices, the fingerprints of the smog, a memory of the week when the sky fell down and the city held its breath.